Welcome to GS Podcast number 121. I'm Stephen Knight. How are you? Good? Good. This will be the second podcast of June. I know some of you might think I've been a bit lazy, and that's true, really. I've been in Mexico, so I only got back around about the 11th of June, so I'm a little bit behind, but rest assured there's plenty of guests planned for July. I'm really looking forward to speaking to a number of them. What else? I'll be speaking at MythCon 5 in September. That's a conference in Milwaukee in the States. I'll be speaking on 2 panels. I'll be moderating one conversation and speaking on the other, and I'm really looking forward to it. So tickets are available now. If you're in that area at the time, do buy a ticket. I think it's going to be a really interesting, vibrant and fun event as well. For those of you who aren't attending, I'll do my best to provide some coverage as well. 2 of the organisers behind that event, Sean and Brian, they host the Mythicist Milwaukee podcast as well with Dimitri, and I sat down for a live video stream with them last week. So you can actually watch that. That's up on YouTube now if you search for the Mythicist Milwaukee YouTube channel. I've also put it on my blog at gspellchecker.com, so check that out as well. Really enjoyed speaking to them guys. It's good fun. Quite a lot of topics covered as well. On today's episode, I'll be speaking to Thom, also known as Vanity Von Glow. In May, there was a event held in central London, organised by Tommy Robinson. It was ostensibly titled A Day for Freedom. And I went along, I got some coverage. You can find that on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/gspellchecker, including Vanity Von Glow's performance, in fact. So definitely go and seek that out. But Thom, aka Vanity, is a cabaret performer. He's created a female character. He sings, somewhat of a diva, and he gave a great performance on the day. I really enjoyed it. The crowd really enjoyed it. You can see that. In my video coverage. The press area was practically bouncing to some of his numbers. Seemed like a bright guy as well. Gave some very intelligent points about free speech and how that can help the emancipation of typically oppressed groups, and everything seemed fine. And then as soon as a lot of the places that book him for work found out that he'd spoke at a quote-unquote far-right event, they canned him, and other venues followed suit as well. So we get into that. We talk about this mob mentality now of, you've said something wrong, you've associated with somebody I don't like, I'm going to get you fired, I'm going to hurt your livelihood, I'm going to tell tales on you to your employer. It's a very common tactic nowadays, and it's no wonder there's a chilling effect on free speech if people are worried about whether or not their opinions may affect their ability to pay the rent. So we really get into that, and I really enjoyed speaking to Thom. So make sure you follow him on Twitter, or follow Vanity on Twitter. There's a blurry line between the character and Thom. You can find Vanity's account at Vanity Von Glow. Send him some feedback, some kind words. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any questions that you've got. Don't forget, this podcast is a one-man operation. It lives or dies based on your support. So it's an entirely audience-driven enterprise. I don't sell anything, I don't run ads, and I don't have a sponsor. So all the support I get is audience-generated. There's a few simple ways you can support this podcast. You can do so by becoming a Patreon supporter. This allows you to pledge a monetary amount. You can either do it per episode or per piece of content, or you can just set a limit for the month. You can say, you know what, I'll give that guy £1 or $1 a month, and you can cancel at any time. Why would you though? Why would you? Or you can go to gspellchecker.com/support. There's a PayPal option there to make one-off contributions. If you can't chip in, don't worry about it. That's all right. You can help the podcast, however, by giving it a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or sharing it around on social media. That really, really helps a lot. Thank you very much for your support, and enjoy.
There's a word that some folks find real hard to spell. Ain't it all for except after saying, who cares to go burn in hell? But then along came a man, a spell took across the God of Creed, and he set out upon a noble quest to help those that don't know what it means. And he said, go A-T-H-E-I-S-T, and don't you
It's a great pleasure to welcome Thom, aka Vanity Von Glow, to the GS podcast. Thom, welcome.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here via telephone.
Very happy to have you. Technology, eh? It's wonderful.
It's great.
Okay, well, before we get into all the controversy that's been surrounding you of late, perhaps you could just let my listeners know a little bit about yourself. How would you describe what you do?
Well, I'm a cabaret artist, but specifically I perform as a female character. So while I, Thom, am a devilishly handsome young man, my character that I play on stage through song and comedy is a sort of a global icon and a very grand, self-important narcissist. So the personas of Vanity and Von Glow and Thom are completely, wildly different, of course.
Okay, well that's interesting because I think I've seen you described as a transvestite. I think I even saw someone refer to you as transgender. So would you say Vanity is a sort of a character that you play? And if so, I mean, how much of that is part of your identity, would you say?
Well, I mean, I think of myself the same way that an actor might think of a role they play. I mean, I'm sure that when an actor comes off stage from playing Aladdin in the musical Aladdin at the Prince Edward Theatre, I'm sure for the purposes of amusing the people around them, they will sometimes maintain the character a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's a role they're playing on stage. What this recent sort of controversy has meant is that the personas got a life now slightly beyond being just on stage, because in some ways it was her that got me into this mess. So it's been sensible to do interviews very much wearing her mantle, as it were.
So describe her mantle, her look for my listeners who may have not had the pleasure.
Big dark hair, sort of very much in the style of your sort of the divas, you know, your Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Celine Dion. That's kind of that's who the character was invented to emulate and to send up. Maybe a bit of Liz Hurley in there as well, all those sorts of characters.
Okay, great. I mean, I've had the pleasure at the Day for Freedom rally, which is what got you in a lot of trouble. A lot of controversy surrounding that event, which I really want to get into. But before we do get into the controversy and the fallout from it, maybe you could just explain about who approached you to be part of that and what was asked of you to be involved in that day.
Sure, a friend of mine who I've known, you know, known on and off for 5 or 6 years. Was one of the organisers, and he would occasionally come to my shows. I mean, really about once a year or something. He'd pop in randomly one night. So after the show, we'd have a drink and a chat, and as you do with friends that you haven't seen in, you know, a long time, you talk about the state of affairs in the world. You talk about each other's work. You know, I'm a cabaret artist, so a lot of my work revolves around cultural commentary. You know, you make the witty asides during your show about news items and stuff that's going on around us. So we would chat about that sort of thing. So he knew already that I was, I suppose, extremely liberal in my in how I feel free speech should be applied. And so when I think they were trying to thicken up the lineup for the Day for Freedom, they thought, well, this is somebody that's going to be a complete curveball. Which indeed it turned out to be. So they asked me to do the Day for Freedom. It wasn't called the Day for Freedom when they asked me, I don't believe. They said that it was an event for free speech where there would be some YouTubers, etc. And it was only about 4 or 5 days before that I knew what the full lineup was, when I actually went to the website myself and saw everyone that would be speaking. So it wasn't necessarily pitched to me as, well, one thing, for example, I have no clue about Tommy Robinson being removed from Twitter, something about which I essentially don't really care. So I wasn't aware of perhaps all of the background to that, but I also think, you know, if you're standing up for free speech, the background of it should be kind of relevant.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's a lot of divides at the moment and a lot of policing about who you should share a platform with, who you should associate with. So, I mean, Tommy Robinson was announced there. I think it was his gig pretty much. Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McGuinness, quite a few controversial figures, Sargon of Akkad. I mean, which of those stand out particularly for you as the most controversial?
Oh, I thoroughly 100% thought Milo was going to be the lightning rod for criticism. It turns out, much I'm sure to his chagrin, that no one in the UK really cares about him. It just hasn't seemed to have percolated through into people's minds. And I have to say, I really was quite surprised at the extent to which Tommy Robinson is essentially a celebrity in this country. I really didn't know that before. So it seems to have been association to him, which has been the source of the most vehement criticism for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said the other day I was doing a video interview with some gentlemen from Mythicist Milwaukee, which is another conference, and I said that Tommy Robinson's probably the most influential living British activist at the moment. I can't think of anyone else who can command that power just to get people to organise in the streets at a whim, which is not to say that he's right or I agree with him, but to wield that kind of political power, it is quite something that I don't think's matched elsewhere. I mean, what do you think's the best response to someone like Tommy Robinson? Because the establishment doesn't seem to have a hand on it, the media doesn't, the general public aren't sure what to make of him, and it seems that the approach to him, more often than not, is trying to shut him down.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think part of what gives him you're right, you know, people do sort of get up off the sofa and go out and plod through London on his behalf, which we've seen in the last few weeks. I think that part of that is probably there is a significant sort of working class connection and working class appeal, which essentially I think it's possible that working class people are simply more inclined to get up off their arse and actually go and do something, rather than your chattering classes who will spend the whole time, you know, condemning one another online and then not really showing up for anything. And that's probably a sort of very broad remark, because I'm aware that a load of people were out in the streets at the weekend for in various capacities, protesting and counter-protesting Brexit and all the rest. I don't know. I mean, you know, I've learned more about Tommy Robinson in the wake of this than I knew before. I think, and we can get into this separately, and I think that you and I have the same opinion on this. While I do actually agree that that the courts should have the ability to place reporting bans on court cases, I do think that's an acceptable derogation from my policy on free speech. I do think it was a huge mistake to put a restriction on reporting his specific arrest, because they literally allowed a global social media movement to decide their conspiracy theory without the media being able to respond.
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
And so while I don't necessarily disagree with the reporting restriction on the case that he was reporting on, I think it was just absolute just butterfingers behaviour from the court to whoever it was that then put the restriction on Tommy Robinson's actual arrest.
Yeah, I agree. A local journalist put some pressure on a few days later, and that was lifted. And we're lucky that happened, really, because we could be in a situation now where it could still be under a reporting ban, just leading to more and more conspiracies. But it doesn't seem to have, even though that reporting ban's been lifted and we've had full detailed reporting on his suspended sentence and his contempt of court, it doesn't seem to have slowed any of these conspiracy theories down from his most ardent supporters, would you say?
No, and it probably, essentially nothing will. Minds are made up. People, the problem is that I really suppose it's sort of a triumph of confirmation bias that suddenly people who have for many years felt that, the deep state are trying to come for them and their beliefs are feeling really, I suppose they feel there's been a confirmation of their suspicions by Tommy's arrest, and they sort of aren't too interested in hearing otherwise.
In terms of the other guests that we've mentioned there that are pretty much the devil to a lot of people in the media, how was your interaction with them? What sort of attitude did you receive from the other guests that were speaking at the Day for Freedom in London?
So the only person that I really spoke to properly, as in, you know, for sort of a few minutes, was Gavin McInnes, who have been criticised in some outlets for describing him as having been a total gentleman, you know, and then everyone's, you know, coming from saying, but he's a white supremacist, or he's transphobic. He said all this and all that. Now, I don't know a huge amount. Again, I don't follow him really at all, but I was aware of an interview that he did with Blair White, who is a trans sort of YouTuber in America, and I remember that in that interview, he sort of his style was just kind of a bit frat boy. He was like asking about, like, does she still have a dick and stuff like that.
Okay. And
I was like, you know, to me, that's just like, maybe it's the British in me and he's an uncouth American, but I'm like, you know, yes, it's nosy, but it's also rude.
Bit vulgar.
It's vulgar is what it is. So to me, when I described him as being a total gentleman based on my few minutes interaction, it was literally and solely in the capacity that, given I was dressed in full drag, I was ready for him to ask me where my dick was. So the fact he didn't, and actually he did show some decorum, and he was quite civil, and we had a few jokes together. He asked what I was going to do. I said, well, I'm a singer, so I'm going to sing. And I asked what he was going to do, and he said, oh, I'm going to sing as well. So, you know, we're just being silly. But, you know, insofar as my interaction with him, the only thing, you know, my lived experience of him, as it were, yes, he was gentlemanly enough. And I felt it was worth saying because I had expected him to be otherwise.
It's really interesting that, because there's a sort of rage industry online, isn't there? And you just get the feeling, you suspect somehow that if these people were having these disagreements face to face, it wouldn't be as volatile, it wouldn't be as uncivil, and you feel that something productive could actually come of it. So I was just wondering how damaging do you think social media is to you know, the discourse on the big issues of the day versus how much it's helping more people get involved in the discussion? Well,
I mean, like, look at it this way. Many of my detractors, in fact, if not all, have detracted from the security of their iPhone screens or from behind their laptop screens. When I went to the Day for Freedom, it was because I really, really am concerned about the distance between us, all of us, you know, everyone that wants to talk about politics. Some people don't care, but anyone that wants to talk about these issues or talk about the philosophy of these things or what's right or how are we best to organise what we think's right or how do we convince people, you know, the distance between us, it feels like it's getting bigger and bigger. You know, the whole sort of the discourse binary, the echo chambers on both sides. So to me, when I decided to attend the Day for Freedom, it was actually about, how about I go and look people, I go and have conversations with people face to face, and then I can make up my mind based on, I guess, real life. In the way that you're saying, I don't think people, I think we lose so many visual cues when we're typing away. We miss the, you know, the sort of sensitivities of vocal inflection and of body language and of all these things which can actually help you build rapport with people. And rapport is the basis on which we start to build proper understanding. So, yeah, I wish that more people would cross-pollinate with one another in person and do less of it online. Okay, so like I say, I was there. I enjoyed your rendition of Shania Twain, and I enjoyed your performance in totality, and you made some very smart comments about how free speech has helped with the emancipation of typically oppressed groups, and I thought, well, this is all well and good. This is exactly as it should be. The event felt, I don't know if you could tell from the stage, but there was more of a carnival atmosphere to it. It felt like almost like a music festival. I don't know what sort of vibe you had. Yeah, I think so. I think part of that is because essentially, you know, like I say, Tommy Robinson is to these people and indeed it turns out now to to many people sort of on the left, he really is a celebrity. You know, given that we live in a culture now in which we can actually have celebrities who we only like ironically, like Gemma Collins, or, you know, people like, I don't know, Jade Goody back in the day. I think that there is this sort of excitement around celebrity of the people like Milo, even Sargon, Gavin McInnes, Tommy Robinson, where people are just a bit more excited than they would be if it had just been... what's his chops from UKIP? Gerard, what's his name? I forget his name now.
Yeah.
See, there you go. There you go. He's not a celebrity. No one cares. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I've been to a few events to report from them. Crowd gathering, street movements. Most of them for Tommy Robinson. He gave, he organised an anti-Sharia march in my home city of Manchester last year, I think, and that had a completely different vibe. I think that it was almost indistinguishable from an EDL rally. You know, quite a lot of fighting, a lot of police needed, a lot of kicking off, things like that. It felt quite unsafe. Whereas this event, it genuinely felt like everyone was having a good time. Maybe it had something to do with the sun being out. We had, you know, pride flags waving, we had Israeli flags, we had people of colour, we had people in wheelchairs, we had someone turned up with a fucking dog at one point, and I thought that we were just ticking all the quotas here. And I think, to me, it just felt like if it was a far-right rally as it's been described, it's the most peculiar, bizarre, diverse, peaceful, positive, far-right rally I've ever had the pleasure of going to.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose on the one hand, though, I understand people's criticism of that would be, well, we're not saying people on the far right can't have fun. Like,
sure.
You know, yeah, I'm sure they enjoy a few beers in the sun as well. Yeah, what's annoying is that the first few days after this, you know, most news outlets were still putting inverted commas around far-right rally when they were describing the event, as if they were sort of waiting to be really robustly challenged in that definition, and they weren't. And so because they weren't, it's now, the quotation marks have gone, and it's now in my personal history that I was at a far-right rally, which isn't really what I signed up to attend per se.
Sure.
It certainly isn't how I interpreted it on the day, although I would agree that there was a strong right-wing element, and by element I mean a majority, I would say. You know, certainly of the, 8 or 9 people that spoke on stage, I'd say we're looking at 2/3 to 3/4 were right-wing. In the crowd, I would say maybe only half. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to judge. I'm quite good at judging a crowd response because it's my job. You know, I've performed in front of huge crowds before, you know, in the tens of thousands at events like, you know, Pride in London and all that. And I've got to tell you, I got a more vehement response on the Day for Freedom than I got doing Pride 2 or 3 years ago in Trafalgar Square, because you know, they have drag queen fatigue on when it's like the 10th drag queen of the day comes on to sing at Pride. And it's that lull in the afternoon where everyone's gone to get a drink, and I can tell looking at you know, a number of people, however many people there are there, I can tell what percentage are into it. And I was ready to go on stage at the Day for Freedom with maybe 40-50% support. I'd say it was about 60-70. So it was by no means rapturous, but I didn't expect it would be at a free speech event.
Right.
So to me, it was kind of, yeah, it was just an interesting thing. But yeah, it was by no means, in my mind, a far right event. I just feel like I'm going to have to let that challenge just go, because history will regard it as having been a far right event, because unfortunately the people with the apparatus to define it have already defined it as such.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I've started labelling this sort of behaviour a far right. People who look at something from afar and don't really investigate, don't go in there on the ground level and talk to people, who just write something up as far right. I think it's lazy journalism myself.
Oh, it's completely lazy, yeah.
So you gave a great performance. You said some very positive and smart words about free speech. At what point do you realise you're in trouble, or something's been stirred simply by your agreeing to speak at this event? Oh,
that day was actually my birthday. So I had the Day for Freedom in the afternoon. I had my 2 usual Sunday night shows in Soho, and then an extra show which was meant to be at 1 a.m. or 1:30 a.m. in Camden, because it was also a bank holiday. So I went to the first of my shows And because it was my birthday, we were doing a comedy roast with some sort of well-known cabaret artists around London who were coming to roast me. And one of them was basically like in a tiz because the venue that they own had been receiving emails of complaint already by just a couple of hours afterwards. And so she was saying, babe, like, what's going on? Like, what were you doing at this event? Like, everyone's saying you were there supporting Tommy Robinson, blah, 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 blah. To which I talked her sort of down from her fears and was like, look, this was a free speech event. This was in no shape or form an endorsement of other people's views, only an endorsement of their right to express them. She seemed fair enough to go on stage and do the birthday roast. But by the time I got to her venue at 1:30 in the morning, she'd already cancelled me. So it all happened pretty quickly.
That's strange, isn't it? I mean, so we've got this mob mentality now, and it's very specific in the sense that if you fall out of favour with this group, or you say something they don't like, or you associate with people they don't like, which seems the case for you specifically, they will go for your livelihood, your place of employment. So these are detractors. I've seen you have agreed to this event, you perform there, they probably wasn't even there themselves, and they've took the time to find out where you perform and get in touch with them directly.
Oh, absolutely. Do you know that of the 8 venues, it was 7, no, it's 8 venues that cancelled my shows, which happened, I think about five or six of them, it was the very next day. So they all cancelled. And with one exception, they cancelled because they were intimidated, and they told me as much. Each of these venues said that they were cancelling because the volume of criticism had them concerned. One venue, the one with which I'm very associated, was warned by the police to start stocking acid attack prevention kits because they were worried about the safety of the staff and of the customers. The phones were not ringing were not stopping ringing. People were going on TripAdvisor and en masse trying to score them down on TripAdvisor, which can really affect a business ongoing. If you're a 5-star business with a pristine reputation, which one of the venues I work for was, I mean, really is an award-winning, critically acclaimed space, and to have it literally being slurred and slandered all because of this, they were literally intimidated. They had to protect their own interests as a business. And so they kind of had no option but to pull me from their lineup. That to me is an actual scandal. I do think it is scandalous for people to behave that way.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible that the threat of violence was considered so genuine that they were told to stock acid prevention kits. And This is obviously far leftist, isn't it? It's not the far right that are trying to make you lose your job.
The far right are not threatening to throw acid in the face of bar staff because I attended a far right rally. That is silly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So indeed, that said, that's not to let the far right off the hook here either, because the leader of the alt-right in America described me as a puddle of degeneracy, apparently.
Is this Richard Spencer?
Yeah, so now I can't find the tweet where he said that, but so I might have to say that's an allegedly. But yes, I was told that, and then the leader of the BNP described me as sickening gender confusion. I've been called all sorts and every name.
You should save some of these for a poster.
Oh, well, they've been on my poster actually.
Great.
Yes, and then one frankly, obviously profoundly stupid woman messaged me saying that she was disgusted that I would accept an endorsement from Nick Griffin to sell my show. I was like, are you fucking mad? Like, this is irony. And if you don't understand that, you really shouldn't come to my show.
Okay, so I mean, you put a number on the amount of venues there that this caused problem with. How many was it in the end?
8 in the end, and that's across England, Ireland and Scotland.
Wow, see, I didn't realise it was that many, to be honest. I did see one venue that publicly made a statement, and they openly threw you under the bus on this situation. How did you feel about that?
They did. So that was... Yes, so that venue is the self-same venue of the artist who came to me in a tiz at the roast saying that she just didn't know what I was doing there. And I gave her my explanation. It was apparently satisfactory for them to continue to do the birthday roast. where we were raising money for autism. It was enough for her to do that, but then she cancelled me without telling me. So by the time I got to her venue, like 3 hours later, I'm cancelled. The next day they put up that status, pretending that they don't have a clue what I could possibly have been doing at the Day for Freedom, despite the fact it had been explained, and it had been a satisfactory explanation, apparently. But, I mean, honestly, I do think that venue in particular, they really have made their bread and butter by catering to a political ideology. And so I can appreciate that for them, they kind of had no alternative other than cancel me, because they had to do so in order to be in keeping with their stated principles as a business. Their stated principles as a business are essentially that they are a, sort of hyper-progressive, gender-dissolving, sort of cultural Marxist kind of thing. That is literally what they're there for. So while I think it was craven and cowardly of them, it was in keeping with their persistent cowardice in life.
I think you're in trouble when you read a statement that says we're all for freedom of speech, but as soon as you see that but, you instantly know that they're not for
it's
that.
Right, it's right up there with I'm not a racist, but
yeah.
I'm just like, the fact that seems so elusive to them, but I do think they were backed into a corner. When I say it was cowardice, I mean, I think everyone in the situation around me got a serious fright, and I certainly never intended for my decision to perform at the Day for Freedom, to accept the invitation. I never wanted that to startle or upend anyone else, and certainly not to make them feel that people in their care, like bar staff, aren't going to be safe. So that was the only venue which I felt made a stand on principle. All of the other venues, it was in response to, this savage nonsense. And then, of course, when they all then, well, I don't know that all of them took a backlash, actually, but then when they cancelled me, they then were starting to get it in the neck from the free speech people and from the far right people too, because so by cancelling me, they just widened the scope of the criticism, which I think has settled down now, obviously. So that's, good for them. But
well, how do you feel this is? I mean, obviously we can say this can't be pleasant, for you as an individual having to put up with this kind of treatment. But I suppose there's an argument to be said that it's been self-defeating in a sense, because it seems to have increased your profile in one sense, or not maybe increased it, maybe just pushed it into a different sphere where other people are noticing you. How do you feel you've progressed since in terms of opportunities and job opportunities, performances, things like that? Has it helped you in any way?
I mean, essentially, my career going forward will need to be different. I think that because of the type of act that I have and the type of show that I do, I mean, I sing, I play an instrument, I work with musicians, I can talk, and it's kind of whimsical and funny. And so to me, this is actually cannon fodder to write a show about. I actually just did a show called Lady Liberty, which was, this was 2 weeks ago, or just under 2 weeks ago, which was a show designed to address all of this. It was sold out. Of course, I mean, the amount of income that I lost as a result of losing all those gigs cannot be redeemed in just one sellout show, but that show was supposed to underline the whole affair. And what I was really pleased with and proud of was that we were sold out. The crowd was diverse in sort of every way, intellectually, politically, all of the usual ways that diversity is championed, also along the lines of sexuality, gender, ethnic background, etc. We had, gender identity. So this really was a performance to a very potentially wide sort of sample of people, but what everyone had in common is they really came with an open mind, which meant that I got to deliver the show in a really, I really got to get it was important to me to get the tone right. And for me, that's a lot of dark comedy. You know, that's always been my style. That's part of why I think free speech is important, because I think we shouldn't be censoring comedians when they make risque jokes and all that sort of stuff. So I was really pleased that we actually did get the tone right, and it really landed with the audience. And, you know, we got 2 standing ovations. It was really like a euphoric night. So it was quite heartening, because I'm thinking, well, hopefully I can do more of that going forward.
Some sort of catharsism as well, maybe?
Yeah, I think it was cathartic, because a lot of these people care about me. You know, they've been coming to my shows for, you know, I've been performing for 10 years. This is my 6th year of being in London doing shows. So people were worried. I think they wanted to show support, but they were also curious, and they wanted to sort of say, well, what do you actually have to say about this? And so they were curious to see, am I going to double down? As sadly people are often forced to do in these situations, they're forced to almost veer right, because when you've been disowned, it's like, well, what are you going to do? So I think sometimes people's fear manifests in a sense that they will veer over further right than they intend in reaction. And I've been careful, and I think I've been successful in not doing that. I know I still consider myself to be essentially left-leaning. Yeah. So I'm not going to let myself be thrown off course by a bunch of lunatics.
Well, I mean, talking of lunatics and getting thrown off course, and in terms of the Day of Freedom, there was a bit of narrative about, oh, you're being, I suppose, exploited in a way. Look, it's the far right. They're saying we've got the token transvestite, we've got the token, performer. In that sense, look at us, how progressive we are. And did you see a lot of that? And what's your response to that kind of removing of your own agency?
Well, I mean, this is literally, if you ask me, this is a sort of one of the favourite tactics of who I would now describe as my opponents on that sort of end of the far left, or certainly at the end of the censorious end of things. You know, that they love to gloss over a person's independence and agency. Partly because free speech is vital to anyone who wants to have independence and agency, I think. But I mean, the one thing I think is, I'm like, well, how do you quantify the extent to which I was being used as a pawn? Because I was on stage in front of 4,000 people at the Day for Freedom. Now, Sargon of Akkad has 800,000 YouTube subscribers, which means he has more followers online than any of the other speakers on the day. So let's assume also, given that he is in the UK, unlike Milo and Gavin, and that he does less public appearances than Milo and Gavin, let's just assume then that perhaps of the 4,000, more people were there for the biggest star than were there for the smaller star. Now, I know more people were there for Tommy Robinson in some ways, but you just don't get to say that of 4,000 people, everyone was there for the worst of what things might have been. So let's say of the 4,000 that half of them were far-right types who feel that they got this sort of trophy in my attendance there. Well, of that 2,000, I then went on fucking national sorry, I swear instinctively.
You can swear, that's fine.
I went on national television on Sky News, which was seen by over 100,000 people, to say I don't support the far right. I then did a video on YouTube, which on Twitter got 50,000 views, that said I don't support fascism and the far right. So more than tenfold, I have literally said I don't support the far right. So if you're arguing that I was used as a trophy, even if that were true, I have literally undone that. So I just think it's nonsense. I really do think that's nonsense.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Andrew Doyle, friend of the podcast. I've had him on. I love Andrew. I love his work. I love his stand-up. I love his collaboration with Tom Walker on Jonathan Pye. He wrote some very good piece in Spiked Online in your defence. He's also brought you in the fold in, is it Comedy Unleashed, is it called?
Yes, I was there a couple of weeks ago.
How's that experience been when someone's basically, put their arm and reached out to you and offered you a little bit of help in a sense? Oh,
it's great. I mean, obviously that, that's, I suppose there's two elements of this. On the one hand, he felt he could, because obviously being a performer, he knew I could deliver a comedy set. So I feel like, I'd imagine in some ways he and the Comedy Unleashed guys will see people sort of get thrown under the bus or misstep and be devoured for it the way that people sometimes are, but they then can't help them. Whereas because I was a performer, they were like, we can actually book her, So it was probably a nice moment for them as well. And I was really grateful because, first of all, it was a really supportive environment, because everyone at the Comedy Unleashed audience is a professed libertarian, basically. So of course they're sort of quite comfortable with free speech. They're not fazed or intimidated by sort of the nasty things people say when they use their free speech. It was great. I'm actually working on some stuff at the moment, and hopefully there is scope for collaboration with people like Andrew in some capacity, because now I basically have to carve a new path. That's a necessity, really. I'm going to have to move in a new direction and sort of adopt a slightly different tone and voice. But as essential as it is, I also kind of look forward to it, because while I didn't ask to become a mouthpiece for my own, I've not asked to become to speak on behalf of anyone else. I've not wanted to wade into the politics thing particularly. I feel like, well, now I'm here, actually, I know I'm quite good at talking about some of these things. And I think also there's a lot of people in the LGBT community that feel completely underserved by the people holding microphones in the community. So I feel it's kind of exciting to think, well, maybe I can go forward and maybe make some really funny satire out of this all.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'd look forward to that coming to fruition. And maybe I could just throw a few questions at you from Twitter if you're sitting comfortably.
Of course.
Okay. Louise Hutchinson has asked, do you wish to go back to performing like you was before the march, or would you like to continue with a more vocal role speaking about free speech and other issues in the future? I think you just touched a little bit on that. I
think in a funny way, if I tried to, because I haven't, for example, essentially, I haven't apologised for attending the march. I didn't. It wasn't a march, actually. There was a march, but it was nothing to do with the Day of Freedom. I wasn't at the march. I literally was performing. I wasn't even really listening to the speeches. We were backstage trying to get a drink, and they shut the pub next to us because they were worried about the counter-protesters. It was very annoying. I haven't apologised, so there is no path of redemption as far as some people are concerned to going back to the way things were. And I think it would be very sort of yellow-bellied of me to do so, to sort of try and crawl back under a rock. I don't think that would be appropriate. I think that would be... I think I have a responsibility to my own principles to say, this is actually what I believe. So yes, I still believe it. So yeah, it'll be moving forwards, not going back.
Okay. I suppose Vicky on Twitter has also asked a very similar question, but worded in a different way, I suppose. And that's, if you'd have known the backlash you'd experience for attending that march, would you still have gone to the march? We keep calling it a march. Obviously, it's a speaking event.
I like to think I'd have still gone. I like to think I won't be intimidated by people's histrionic criticisms, I think, I knew, of course, that I may receive a strong backlash. I didn't think that I would lose. There was one or two gigs I didn't think I would lose. I do also think that in losing the gig I didn't think I lost, it basically created the knock-on effect where all the other venues felt like, well, if they've dropped her, then we have to too. But in fact, all but one or two of these venues have said, I'm friendly with the owners and management. They've been like, we really adore you. We do want to work with you. We're not saying we don't want to work with you in the future. We just can't do it right now. So I'm not saying I wouldn't go back to to doing the odd thing for people.
Yeah. Maybe when you're 2 minutes hater up and they've found somebody else, you can go back to work.
The LGBT community literally will. This is a quarterly occurrence. It happened with Josh Rivers. The editor of Gay Times, who was hired as a champion for diversity because he's a Black American. And then they discovered tweets of his from 2012 or something where he was saying he wanted to punch, I can't remember, it was like he wanted to punch a Chinese man or something ridiculous.
We've all
like
been there.
Yeah. And he was sacked, disgraced. It happened with Monroe Bergdorf. She said that all white people are racist. She was dragged in many ways and criticised. It happens. There'll be another. But yes. Anyway, no. Let's have the next question.
Okay. Well, Vicky has also asked whereabouts in Scotland you're from.
I'm from Fife, but I lived in Glasgow for 7 years. I went to university when I was 17. So from 17 to 23, I lived in Glasgow. So I always say Glasgow's home, but I don't sound like I'm from Glasgow.
No, not at all. I can understand you for one, so it's all
Yes.
it's all positive. And lastly, Chris has asked you to name your comedy heroes.
Barry Humphries. And Barry Humphries was obviously the man behind Dame Edna Everage.
Oh, of course.
Who is, again, it's a female satire character. But his comedy, it was informed by Dadaism back in the 50s and 60s in Australia. It was absurdist. He would stand next to a bus stop and pull a full course meal out of the bin that he put there earlier and start eating it in front of astonished onlookers, because what he wanted to do was disrupt people, because for him comedy was an opportunity to disrupt status quos, violate taboos, stimulate and massage free thought. That level of satire is really, really missing at the moment. And I find, even the idea of him as a man absurdly dressing up as this woman, this Dame Edna with the purple hair. The purpose of that was to send up Australian middle class sensibilities, and so to me that's the absolute sort of pinnacle of what great comedy can be. And I don't think I'll ever be there. I would love to, but that's what I aspire to. That level of sort of comic perfection. I love him.
Excellent. Okay, Thom, well, I've really, really enjoyed speaking to you. I'm sorry you've had to go through a lot of this treatment, but it seems like you're finding your feet and you really know your own mind, and it is great listening to your perspective on it all. It's been quite enlightening. Is there anything at all you want to get across to my listeners before I let you catch what might be left of this British summer?
Well, the good thing, I'll leave you with an amusing story. The good thing is I do have, I've got a show. Like the gigs are starting to creep back in. I'm in Great Yarmouth. I'm in Cardiff. I've got a private party this weekend. I've got on a boat. I'm in Berlin in a couple of weeks doing a show. So stuff's coming back. But the first show I did back was in Glasgow, where I'm quite well known, because I obviously, in the 10 years of performing, 4 of them, the first 4 were in Glasgow. And I went up north, and the venue I was booked in books a lot of burlesque and, people like that, who are almost to a man the types of, are very much the most infuriated by my having gone to the Day for Freedom, are your sort of left-wing performer types. And one performer there was on Facebook saying, how dare the Polo Lounge book, that's the venue, how dare the Polo Lounge book fascist sympathiser Vanity Von Glow. She's an Islamophobe, she's a this, she's a that. I challenged her in the comments, and she eventually took the post down because she had no evidence of any of her claims. And when I arrived at the venue, the manager came to me and he was like, "Oh, it's good to have you back. It's good to have you back. How are you doing? Oh, it's been ages. Are you right?" And he went, "You've been causing trouble up here without even being up here." And I said, I know what happened. And he said, well, I know you won't be pleased to know this because you don't believe people should lose their work for the things they say. And I was like, no, I don't. I certainly don't. And he said, but that idiot that was slagging off this venue, which books her, for booking you. He went, well, we've just now told the booker she's not to be booked here again or in any of the company's 54 other venues around Scotland.
Wow.
And I was like, did this silly bitch not learn anything from what happened to me? I'm like, you need to shut your mouth unless you want to keep your... And, I honestly don't agree with people losing their work. I think it's slightly different when you literally slag off your employer.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't want her to be screwed out of work just for being, frankly, an idiot.
A lot of us would be out of work, wouldn't we?
I did think there was some amusing symmetry, which just seemed to fly over her head. And I was like, look, we just need to stop all of this nonsense. We need to calm down and we need to come back together. Because that girl and myself, I don't even know her, but we should be natural allies in a lot of what we believe. And to make an enemy of me has made a fool of herself.
Yeah, that's a great point to end on. Thom, thank you very much for giving up your time again. I've really enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you very much for having me, and I hope we speak again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Godless Spellchecker podcast. The podcast is a one-man operation, produced in my spare time away from my day job, and I love making it for you. If you enjoy what you hear, please consider lending some support. The show is entirely listener supported. I don't sell anything, I don't run ads, and given the alternative and unpopular focus of my content, it's very unlikely to find a sponsor. So there are a number of ways you can support and chip in and help improve the show and give me more time to produce more content. You can become a patron supporter and pledge a monetary amount per month or per episode by visiting patreon.com/gspellchecker. If you can't lend monetary support right now, don't worry, there's other ways you can help the podcast too. You can share it on your various social media networks, or take a moment to leave a review wherever you listen to it. Your support is massively appreciated. Thank you. Think we've all learned something here today?